And then next we have the image section. Under here you can find mode. This is where you choose if you want a bitmap, grayscale, RGB, CMYK, how many bits per channel. Generally, especially for beginners, you're going to be working mostly in RGB and having the 8 bits per channel. That's the basic setup and default. Then you got adjustments. There's a lot of adjustments in here as far as the brightness and contrast levels and curves. These are all just exposure. These are all ways to adjust your image for saturation and vibrance and just a lot of different things. Adjustments is also going to be something that needs its own section to really show what it can do. Photographers really use a lot of the adjustment type of things to get their images to look exactly the way they want them to. There's a lot of really cool stuff in there. Auto tone, contrast, and color. These are Photoshop's way of kind of guessing what it thinks you want the tone, contrast, and color to be. So if you don't want to go through and spend time trying to fine tune it, you can take your image and do an auto tone, and Photoshop will apply its algorithms to automatically make the tone even and what it thinks you want. Same for contrast and color. Sometimes you can start with an auto tone, contrast, and color and then fine tune it from there. Image size, canvas size. These are things you'll use a lot, and it's important to understand the difference. The image size specifically changes the actual image that you're working on. The canvas size changes the canvas and not the image. As an example, if we change this image size that I'm working on to, let's say, 800 wide, and I'll leave it linked. This little link here makes sure that you keep your proportions the same. So change it to 800. It's going to change my entire image down to 800 wide. Now, the canvas size, if I want a bigger canvas but I don't want to change the actual images, you can change the canvas size. Say I want it a little bit bigger. We'll make it 2200 wide and 1200 high. There we go. So now we have a bigger canvas, and you can fill in the background or pattern it or whatever you need to do with the background, but that doesn't change the image size itself. Okay, let's undo that. Then we have image rotation options, standard options. You can rotate your image 90 degrees, 180 degrees, however you want. You can flip the canvas to mirror it horizontally or vertically. Crop and trim, those are pretty standard to crop. This way, without using the tool, you would just use your selection tool. Select the area you want to crop it into, and now crop becomes highlighted. It'll crop down. And trim, what trim will allow you to do is just basically trim away certain pixels or transparency from the edges of the image. So let's go ahead and make our canvas a little bit bigger again. We'll make it 2000 wide. Now you can see we've got our images within this size, but we've got extra transparency around the edge. Maybe we don't want to try to crop it perfectly or cut it down to that or try to figure out the measurements on it. We just want to trim away the transparent pixels, and that's where you would use trim. So we go to image trim. This little options dialog pops up. You can trim by transparent pixels or certain pixel colors you have here, and which ones do you want to trim away? Maybe you only want to trim away the left and not the right. Once you hit OK, what you've chosen goes away. Next we have reveal all. What reveal all does is if you have some elements or items that are hanging off the edge of the canvas, kind of like that, and you want everything to fit within the canvas the way that it is, but without actually moving them back in, you would just simply do a reveal all, and Photoshop will resize your canvas to fit everything that you have. This can be helpful sometimes when you have things like drop shadow effects. Even maybe your image goes right up to the edge and you put a drop shadow on it, and now your drop shadow looks like it's cut off. If you reveal all, it'll expand the canvas to include your drop shadow effect. Then we have duplicate, apply image, and calculations. Duplicate will simply duplicate the file that you're working on. Make another copy and you can start making changes from there. Maybe you just want to preserve the one you've got the way it is and you're going to go off in a whole new direction and you want to come back to this one and do something else to it. The apply image command essentially lets you blend one image's layer and channel, which would be the source layer, with a layer and channel from your active image. So you would take another image and blend it into the one you're working on. And then the calculations command kind of does a similar thing. The calculations command lets you blend two individual channels from one source image, well, one or more source images, and then you can apply those to the active image that you're working on. So similar kind of thing. Then the last couple of things we have here, apply variables, data set, trap, and analysis, are all very complicated, complex tools that have specific purposes to specific industries. The trap tool is going to be mostly used for printing. It has to do with overlapping colors and making sure that they come out right. The variables is something that gets used for creating data-driven graphics. So that's a whole nother thing in itself. And the analysis menu is specifically for measuring, counting, and analyzing pixels in Photoshop. I think that pretty much covers the image menu. Okay, and next we have layers, or the layer menu. And I'm kind of realizing now that going through all the items like I have been could take a long time, and I don't want you guys to get bored, so I'm going to try to move a little quicker. If I glaze over something that you feel like is important or you want more explanation on, just let me know and I'll come back and add that in. But for now, I'm just going to try to quickly go through the rest. For the layers menu item, you have things that are directly pertaining to the layers themselves. So everything in here has to do with a layer. You got a new layer, you can do different layers, background layer, groups layers, and that's going to add new layers over here. Copy CSS is a cool thing to take note of. If you're a web designer, you can copy the CSS for whatever layers you're on. Do that. It basically just puts the CSS on a clipboard, and then you can go into Notepad or wherever you're going to use and paste that CSS in there. Duplicate layer simply duplicates layer on. Delete deletes layer. Let's see, quick export as a PNG or export as. This will export specifically the layer you're on as either a PNG or whatever you define you want. Then we have rename, layer style. Well, rename is self-explanatory, I believe. Layer style, just will apply one of these styles to the layer, which you can also do over there in the layers palette. You have smart filters, new fill layers, which will fill with either a solid color, gradients, or patterns. And got some masking options, layer mask, vector masks, and clipping masks. Smart objects, video layers. And a reason I want to kind of gloss over some of these right now is because I know that I'm going to come back to the more important ones in other lessons. But for right now, it's just getting your eyes on what's in here. So you have smart objects that you can either convert things into smart objects or do various different things with those. A smart object is essentially if you want to have an object, an object being an item in a layer or something that you want to retain its properties, you can convert it to a smart object and scale it down, scale it up, and it'll scale in percentages rather than simply just the size or the pixels, and you can always go back to the original. Video layers and rasterizing. Rasterizing will take your smart objects or vector objects and rasterize them. New layer based slice is for web design. We have this is a group layers, which is what we already did a little earlier in the layers palette. And ungroup, hide. You can arrange things forward and backwards if you want things to be in the front or the back, which you can also do in the layers palette. Combine shapes. A lot of this stuff you really would do in a layers palette anyways. Align layers to a selection. You can pick one thing that's selected or you can make a selection and then you can align all the layers to that selection. You can distribute which is like all the same things you see up here at the top right now based on the move tool that I have selected. And you can lock your layers. You can also do that by clicking on the padlock over here on the layers palette. You've got link layers. You can link your layers together. You can select certain link layers. You can merge layers, merge the ones that are just visible. This would be to all of them. You can flatten the image, basically just taking all your layers and combining them into one layer. And then matting options here. Okay, I know that one was quick. Like I said, if there's anything you want to know specifically more about, let me know and I'll be happy to come back and add that in there. Next we have the type menu option. This all has to do specifically with your type, your fonts. You can add them from Typekit, which is a great tool that Adobe has, much like the stock imagery, which has now been combined into Adobe's interface. They have their own font tool, which is called Typekit, and they provide web-based fonts or desktop fonts, all of it, and you can download them, most of them, and put them on you can put them in your system so that you can work with them in your files, and then you have lots of options of things you can do with it from there. An example here would be, let's see, if I open this up, these are all my fonts that I have available, and certain ones have the little Typekit logo or icon, and those are ones that came directly from Adobe. And then we've got the different panels that you could want to use or see. You've got making your type anti-alias, orientation and open type options. You can extrude a word or a letter or whatever type you have to 3D, which has a lot of different options in itself. You can create a work path for your type, convert your type to a shape, rasterize it. Type by nature is a vector object, and you can't do a lot of different effects and things with them unless you rasterize it. Warping and converting to point text. You have font preview size, so this is just a preview size. No. Simple as that. Language options. These, if you're in other countries, you may want to take a look at what those can do for you. Updating all your text layers, replace missing fonts, resolve missing fonts. This is for sometimes you get a file from somebody else, or you have a file that you had on a different system and you had some fonts and now you don't. You'll open it. When you open it up, Photoshop will let you know right away, these fonts are missing. What do you want to do? If you don't want to update them or replace them, it will keep them looking the same unless you try to edit them. Once you try to edit them, then it will know you don't have that font, so it's going to try to find a substitution. Lorem Ipsum, which you can see I have right here. It's a great tool for just putting placeholder type or placeholder copy in place, and they built a tool right in here to put some Lorem Ipsum in there. And then you can have your default type styles or save and set your default type styles. Then we have select options. These all have to do with your selections, such as your marquee boxes. When you come in here, you can have it select all, which is going to be everything in your canvas. Deselect, which you see me keep doing and I haven't explained why or how I'm doing it, and that's because I always use the Control D to deselect. So if I have a marquee box, it disappears and I hit Control D. Reselect if you deselected something you didn't want to, which could also be done through the history. Go back to the selection you had, and you can select all of your layers. You can see over here all the layers are selected. Oh, I realized I skipped over inverse. So if you've got a selection here and I've got just this image area selected, I want the opposite selected, so I want to select everything but the image. I would select inverse, and you can see the little racing ants go around everywhere else. So all this is what's selected. You can deselect all the layers. You can find specific layers. You can isolate layers. Color range and focus area. refining your mask, which would be your layer mask. If you put a layer mask on it, you may want to refine the mask itself. Modify your selection. This is where you can add borders, you can smooth out your selection, expand it, contract it, feather it. Quick example here, we'll go expand, so we've got it around the button a little bit there. We'll expand it, and you can choose how much. We want to expand this by 20 pixels, and now I've got a bigger selection. And you can do the opposite where you contract it, or you can feather, and feathering is basically blurring out the edges. So if I wanted to have kind of a blurred edge around it where it's not a hard line, that would be feathering. And the same thing with feathering, you can select how much you want to feather. 0 essentially being the hard edge, and the more you feather out, the more the edge will blur. And if we have grow and similar, and this is essentially if you've got you've used the magic wand or something and you've selected certain areas, growing it will just grow it out just a little bit, kind of selecting pixels that are similar right next to it. If you did similar, it would select the similar pixels all throughout the entire canvas. Transform selection is now if you want to just transform what you've selected. I don't actually have anything selected in here because I don't have any layers selected, but that's what that would do. If I wanted to just stretch and move, I would select that and transform that on that layer. And load and save, so you can save specific selections, and you can load so that you can load them later if it's a selection that you know you use frequently. Edit in quick mask mode, you can make a selection that you can come and edit with a quick mask, and then you can also select elements from your design to extrude in the 3D tools of Photoshop.